Does it say it's recorded anywhere?
No, it's not come on yet.
Oh, yes, it has
Oh,
now.
it is now. Yes, so it is.
Okay, I'll let everyone in. Okay, that's everyone in, I think. I'll do. This.
Popping up.
I'm trying to change it. It's not doing it. Yeah. Try and do it just so people can come in now. Okay. I think I've opened it now, so people should just be able to come in without beeping.
Super. I'm going to just jump in really quickly then and say welcome and a massive thank you to CEIAS. We've had so many questions from members about transitions, about moving on to the next stage of their child's education. Some of them from 2022, so starting this September, some of them looking ahead, trying to plan ahead to next year. So we've asked CEIAS if they could come along and give us a bit of information, a bit of grounding, sort of the basics to start with, and then they've kindly agreed that if we've got any questions and things, we can pick up on that with them as we go. The session is being recorded, so if you don't want to be on the highly popular CEPCF YouTube channel, then keep your camera off. But it's just so that people who aren't able to join us right now can still get this information. If there's any questions, the chat is there. Stick your hands up. I will try and keep an eye on that. I don't know if anyone has any questions at this point. No? Fantastic. We'll hand over to Penny and Diane, if that's all right.
Thank you. Can I just add in there? Our understanding was that this will be a question and answer session. I'm not sure if I've got anything wrong, but that's what Anne Thornton, our manager, let us know. Penny, let me know if I've missed something. It's any.
No, you haven't. That's what we
spoke to Anne the other day, and she said you don't need to prepare anything. It's just literally because transition is huge between, you know, all different age groups, and it was just going to be a question and answer. So anybody that had any questions that is what our understanding was. So
can I?
But is that okay, Kate? I mean, I was going to say, obviously, as the questions come in, if towards the end of the session we think there's something really important about transitions that hasn't been asked or covered, I'll leap in, or Diane will leap in and just say, by the way, in this situation, just to give you a bit more. But yes, certainly. And also, if you and or Kayla have questions from parent care forum members who can't be here, that you want to ask on their behalf, absolutely fine as well. I don't know if you want to kick off.
I think that's probably a good way to work it, actually, Kate. If you've got any questions, and we can start those conversations going in. If anybody wants to jump in into the chat, would that work well? In terms of, we have got leaflets prepared for the 3 stages of transition that are being sent out. I don't know if they've been sent out already. They've been completed, but for our monthly guides.
Kate has shared those, yes. So they've been shared with our Facebook group. Once our website's back up and working, we will put the links on there as well. If anybody wants them, then we can email them out to them. For a starter question, then Kayla's just put one from someone who's asked us to ask this, but they couldn't be here, is when should parents start thinking about transitions?
In terms of, sorry, go on.
I mean, I would say if you haven't got an EHCP, but you think or know that your child has special educational needs and or a disability, that you need to be thinking 12 months ahead, ideally, and start to look at it then. If you've got an EH, or even a little bit more, if you've got an EHCP, then obviously you're sort of bound by there are timescales set out in law about when that EHCP should be reviewed, depending on your child's age and the phase they're moving to and from. But again, that is going to be, if you've got somebody in a primary school, they will have a year 5 transfer review. And that's where you're officially beginning to look at that transition to high school. But again, you know, you might start thinking before that, so that at that transfer review, you could invite the SENCO from the school you're thinking they might be going to. Tricky at the moment, and I know people's capacity means the SENCOs aren't always able to do that. So with that move from primary to high school, you're probably 18 months, I would say, beforehand, something like that. And your year 6 annual review will have to be in the autumn term of year 6. And probably by October, do you think, Dan? I know they say October, November, but as early as possible, really, because it has to be completed. And that means with the final EHCP, with the proposed school for the next September, named an I by February the 15th. Skipping back, because I always do things in the wrong order. If your child's in preschool or nursery and you're thinking of moving into reception, again, a year, 15 months, something like that. I suppose, I don't think it's ever too soon to start looking ahead. Although young children can make progress and develop very quick, you know, very rapidly, I still think you might have a good idea of the kind of settings you want to look at. And again, your annual review if your child has an EHCP in preschool or nursery needs to take place in that autumn term, so that it's completed, absolutely completed by February the 15th. And I'm kind of going to emphasize the point here. When we talk about phase transfer annual reviews in advance of a phase transfer, it doesn't mean you have a little meeting where you talk about the setting. It's not about, sorry, Kate's smiling. So maybe that's something parents have asked. It isn't, you can't just have a placement review. The law is quite clear. And if you want to look, it's Regulation 18, SEND regulations. In there makes it quite clear it must be a proper review, a full review, which is also looking at the school that the parent would like named. So in order for that to be done by February the 15th, they need to be done in the autumn term. If your young person is moving from year 11, so post 16, or and then they've got until March the 31st to complete the annual review. So you could maybe December, would you say, Diane? Because I think even February would be pushing it. I mean, yeah, January would be pushing it. December, really.
There's a lot of misunderstanding, I think, in terms of some settings, and that they say they've got to start it by then. However, it's got to be completed. It's got to be completed by either the 15th of February for those early transfers from early years to reception or infant to junior. It's got to be completed by the 15th of February. There's a lot of schools are great, you know, but there are, you know, and there's obviously new staff and SENCOs and people come into positions that aren't aware of those types of dates. But in terms of that is when it's got to be completed. So it's got to be completed in plenty of time for that review to take place within those weeks, and then the request for a particular setting name. So that does take time. So it should be held really early October, late September, early October, and we have had parents that have received their education, health and care plan for their young child person in, say, May, June, and schools are saying, well, we don't have to review it, so, but you do have to review it, because you've got that's got to be in place then for that phase transfer.
Yeah.
And as I say, with secondary setting, you know, moving to post 16 settings from secondary school from year 11, that should be done in time for that to be completed by the 31st of March.
And if someone's in a post-16 setting and they're going to move to another post-16 setting, which does happen, that deadline is roughly the same around the 31st of March, because it has to be completed with at least 5 months before the move to the new setting, and that does come around end of March, early April. But I would just a reminder, an annual review, a review is a statutory process, and you've got to be looking at the needs, provision, outcomes specified in the EHCP, decide where they need to change. So all those things have got to be discussed, not just which school. And actually that makes sense, because if the EHCP isn't right, you know, then it might not be indicating the setting that your child or young person needs. So it's quite important to get that. And when you say start looking at it, I know the local authority recently have started sending out, I think it was the first time this year, I could be wrong, it might have been the year before, where they asked parents to, if you've got an EHCP, they've been asking parents to name, let them know which schools they'd like named before they've had the annual review usually. And there's nothing to say they shouldn't or ought not to do that, but actually, you know, the annual review technically is your opportunity to say this is a school I'd like named when you get the proposed amended plan back. But I think I do agree that the sooner you can indicate where you might like, and that would be maybe year 5 annual review if it's a primary age child moving up, so that the local authority's got that idea, the sooner the better really, because as we know, it can take quite some time to consult and establish a place that can meet need.
Okay, I've just put the link in the chat from IPSIA regarding phase transfer reviews.
Yeah, that's a good idea.
So there's further information on there. Just want to refer to a couple of questions. Sorry, it just keeps jumping about now. Just let me go back, make sure I've not missed anything. Best practice to use the transition to high school for my child to meet new teachers. Is there a typical time in advanced schools assign who the teachers are? And that's, we have sent something out. We'll send something out that Parent Care Forum will share, which is the phase transfer for, which is the transfer to secondary school, to high school, for with tips on how to make that transition easier. In terms of assign who the teachers are, I think that's conversations to have with individual schools. Sometimes they don't do the timetables till late, you know, they don't know before the holidays in terms of timetables.
But again, I would say it depends if your child's got an EHCP or not. But even with an SEN support plan, you could have something around transitions captured in that, so that you are making, you know, talking about that well in advance. And I know schools, yes, sometimes don't make the decision until quite late in the day. But if it was in your education healthcare plan, then it's a binding document really. So as long as you've got something captured about transitions and what your child will need, and even if they don't know the teacher, maybe they'll know the classroom, so they can go and look at that or see pictures of that, or learn, you know, if it's a different part of the cloakroom or lockers at high school, anything, all those kind of things. Even if they don't actually know the person yet, they can prepare them for the other elements, the environmental elements of that transition, I would hope.
And a lot of schools will do transition days where the children can go in at school holidays. I know in Macclesfield there's a couple of schools that will do, you know, as well as the enhanced transition days when schools are in, they will do days within the summer holidays where children with additional needs can go in and look around the school and familiarise themselves with teachers and environment. And classrooms to be able to ease that transition for September. So I think it's checking with the individual schools, which in terms of what they can provide.
Yeah, I would say I think it's on our quick guides. We've put some links anyway. Anna Freud has a lot of information about transitions to various stages of education. Looking at it from a mentally healthy schools point of view, so you might find some useful information there. also, dependent on your child's particular needs, National Autistic Society, ADHD Foundation UK, all these kind of websites do generally carry information about transitions too, and they might be useful as, you know, conversation starters with your particular setting. I don't know where we're up to with the questions, Kate.
I'll guide with the questions because I know where I'm up to now.
Oh, good day.
So what about dates for transitions post 18 or non-advanced education and training?
Again, that would be the same as a further carrying on from post 16. So
yeah,
at least 5 months before you're expecting to start at the new place. So that is roughly end of March, early April, depending on the college or, you know, the setting start date in the September. Okay. So again, that annual review would need to be done in December, really, I would suggest, or maybe early January.
Yeah, and to be able to be completed for March, the end of March. Our son is transitioning from primary to secondary. We have asked for both Senkos to meet to discuss transition. Would you expect the SEN plan for the secondary school to be developed in place before day one arriving at school? Now,
I think it would be expected but the thing about an SEN support plan is it's not legally enforceable. So, but I think it would be good practice. And again, if you went back to the SEN Code of Practice, where it talks about SEN support and working with parents and working with other professionals, I would say that good practice, therefore, is to have that liaison and to have it in mind ready before they go, not least to reassure the child themselves or young person what to expect. Now, I know some settings parents have told us, say, oh, we need them to come and settle in and then we'll work out towards half term what they need. Again, SEN Code of Practice, I'm sure you can find some quotes in there where it talks about that assess, plan, do review cycle. Nowhere does it say that when transitioning from one setting to another, you can break that cycle. No, so with the primary school, so with the primary school, it said an SEN support plan is no longer required. This child's making good progress now. We think they can drop down from that level of SEN support. Then you might imagine the new setting would wait and see. But if it's still running at the previous setting, then I think I would be asking them, you know, why aren't you continuing that process of assess, plan, do review? So the summer review would be that opportunity to work out what's going to be needed in September, yeah.
And I think, you know, I've been to lots of really good transition reviews where the Senko from the high school has attended the year 6 review, and they've shared information, and even though it's not put in a robust plan, they have that information there as to, because it will look different in a secondary school setting to what is being provided in a primary school setting. So what does tend to happen with SEN support plans is that if the Senko's got from the secondary school has got all that information and they've shared that information and worked holistically through the review primary school, then that information is shared, and usually then they will hold an SEN support plan review or an EHC review early in the autumn term to discuss, because it's a different setting and things will be different on that plan in terms of the environment. You know, you do find a lot of SEN support plans especially will need updating because it's different how things work in secondary schools to primary. So I'm just going to go on to the next question. Oops, too far. My son is a named school and moving from mainstream primary to specialist secondary. When would you expect a specific transition plan to be in place? Sorry, I want to talk now, but I'm being told there's lots of time and just feeling like I'm being fobbed off. Now a school is named, I'm feeling like I'm back to the bottom of the pile. Key worker cancelling meetings and school not having time to see me as much. So your son has a named school, gone from mainstream school to specialist secondary. So that would have happened. So I'm presuming a setting has been named in section I.
Yeah. So again, it's almost what have you got on section F of your EHCP at your year 6 annual review? What was agreed that was needed to meet needs around transitions? So sometimes it's there is a section usually where they're covering transitions either in preparation for adulthood or independent life skills. Somewhere in that EHCP there should be a need identified in B around transitions, and then in F a provision how they're going to meet that need. Hopefully if you look at your EHCP you'll find that, and if it was agreed how the what transition support your child needed, they should be sticking to it. If when you look at your EHCP there isn't anything specific, then I think it is back to phased transition, moving up to a specialist setting. It does seem to depend, if it's not in your plan, on the setting they're going to. Some specialist settings are very, facilitate quite a long phased transition very willingly, and as a matter of course it's just how they work. In which case, if you don't feel that you're managing to get hold of your key worker, I'd consider, asking the setting first, emailing them, asking them what they intend to do and what that transition looks like for their particular setting. But again, have a look what the wording is in your EHCP, because the answers may be there, it may already have been agreed, and it's just that someone's not done it yet. But we know people who've started after the half term in the summer, don't we, Diane? Ready to move up with it, a few extra visits. And that's the same, even if they're moving from a mainstream primary to a mainstream high school, they've facilitated extra visits. So I do think, have a look what's in your EHCP, and then maybe talk to the school. If you're not managing to get hold of the key worker, try and talk to the school that they're going to.
Could I just chip in some personal experience?
Sorry, I've just noticed you've got your hand up, Kate. Sorry.
I was just going to chip in. It's nothing legal or enforceable like Penny's saying, but just some reassurance. I found when my son moved from a mainstream primary to a specialist secondary, it's quite a change of culture in terms of the expectations about the way that they engage with parents is quite different. And I think because every child they're looking after has special educational needs, has an education healthcare plan, it's a bit more normal for them. And I found it was really useful for me to contact them and just say, I've never had my child go to a specialist setting anymore, so could you just give me some reassurance when, and just explain, you've probably got this all under control, I know that, but anything you can tell me just to reassure me. And that meant they then sort of went back to basics and explained stuff that they probably wouldn't have thought I needed to know, but I did, because it was very different. It was quite a different setup.
The only thing I would just mention, and I'm almost afraid to mention the word transport, you may need to think a bit flexibly about the transport. If that specialist setting is some distance and you are expecting the local authority to provide the transport for transition visits, I think you'll find that the sort of party line is they'll say we don't do that. That's not to say that's not open to some negotiation with them, and I would negotiate with them about it, but just to warn you, we have heard that that's happening quite frequently. They say, well, you will get your transport, home to school transport from September, but we don't facilitate any transition visits.
Sorry, I'm just looking back over the charts and
so no, it's fine, Dan. I'm glad you're keeping an eye on it.
It's okay. It's okay.
I'm hopelessly lost.
It's okay. Is there any more questions, Kate, that you've got up front in terms of just while I'm going through these?
Sorry, I'm talking on mute, aren't I? I think the next question I've put in the chat. It's a question from a parent who couldn't attend. Their child's in year 6 and they've just had the year 6 review. they're confused about what should be in the plan now. Should it still reflect what needs to be happening now in primary? Because they were worried about how does that get enforced, because the provision is going to look quite different at secondary. And there was a lot of confusion about in section F in the plan, should it talk about provision now, provision from September, or both? What would that look like?
Well, there should be both short-term and long-term outcomes in section F. So there should be that provision that's for year 6, but also provision those long-term outcomes for high school.
So the provision should be there for both. Dan's, yeah, you're right, Dan. And the same with college if they're in year 11. The provision to continue to meet their needs in year 11 should be in there, but also some of the language change, you know, some things will need changing in there ready for September at college, where it is quite different, but they should all be in there. Yeah. And that's why sometimes when they then go to the next setting, the next annual review is done a little bit earlier again, just to tweak and change that. But it should be clear. Yeah, it should be clearly in there what provision they need when they step through the door.
And in this,
or even at their transition visits in the meantime, if it's, you know, applicable.
That's a top tip to pass on. In this instance, the parent had been told that the stuff that was happening at primary school couldn't go in the plan anymore because secondary schools wouldn't be able to do that level of, it was about 1-to-1 or not 1-to-1, and they'd agreed.
But again, if it, sorry, interrupted Kate, if it's specified in the EHCP, it's legally binding and must be implemented. You know, you can't, and again, if that school have said we can meet need, if they've seen the EHCP and said we can meet need, and the EHCP says this young person needs A, B, C, D, then that next setting is going to have to deliver it.
And so theoretically, could a plan say, while in this setting, this provision, and while in the next setting, slightly different provision?
I'm not sure it could. I mean, theoretically, maybe, because the thing about a plan is once it's in there, it's legally enforceable and it has to be implemented. And it should only, you can amend a plan without another annual review and take stuff out, I suppose. But you could put timescales in. But strictly speaking, the needs aren't going to change. If the needs aren't going to change, why would you be changing the provision, you see?
I think also in terms of, if you're talking about phase transfer and we're talking about annual reviews happening in September, October, November, going now into the next year when a child starts that next year in their next transfer, you know, whether it's to primary school or to secondary school or post 16, their annual review will be coming up then anyway in September, October. So there's got to be a level of flexibility in terms of, you know, a child starting a new setting, because, you know, schools, colleges, primary schools have got to get a little bit of time to get to know that child, rather it being really set in stone. You've got to do this because it says it on the plan, which is very true. But there's also got to be a level of flexibility because they're moving from one setting to another, and I think it's just that there's got to be a little bit of leeway at that time, and then the review will be held and within the autumn term. So things can become a lot more watertight then in terms of the environment that they will be in.
And that brings us back to that, you know, an annual review must be completed within 12 months of the first EHCP and every subsequent 12 months. And of course, if they've done this year 6 annual review, as Dan says, when they should end September, early October, they've also then got to get the next one done at that time of year. And this is where sometimes we've well, in fact, often we've had parents who've been told by a setting, oh, year 8 reviews are all done in March, year 9 reviews are all done in January, year whatever, they've got a timetable. And I understand logistically from a settings point of view, it's really helpful for them to be able to spread them all out over the academic year. And also, you know, they might think, well, if we do an annual review early September, late September, early October, then we've got to do one again at the beginning of the next year, and we're going to end up with all our annual reviews all the way through high school being September and October. So from a practical point of view, I can see why that might be tricky for the schools. But the law, I know Dan's talked about a bit of flexibility there, but the law around when annual reviews must take place, the flexibility is that you can bring the annual review forward, but not that you can push it back. You can't. And obviously the recent High Court ruling has made it clear that once the annual review meeting does take place, not only must they now send you a decision letter within 4 weeks of the meeting about whether they propose to amend or not, they have actually got to send you out those proposed amendments as well now, which is I think it's a ruling we welcome, Diane, because it gives us some clarity. So again, if that review is done quite early in the new setting, you would know within 4 weeks, you know, what those proposed amendments are, and there shouldn't be too much delay. But again, some needs are going to be known to continue from setting to setting, so they should be clearly identified at the Year 6 annual review and, you know, kept in there until it's felt they need to change. And obviously with every need, there's a provision. So
okay, can I just go to Nikki? Nikki's got a hand up.
Yeah,
Nikki.
Hi, I was just going to ask, in regards to the post-18 side, if you thought that a social care involvement might be appropriate, at what point would you ask for the, I suppose, social care needs assessment to be done?
Yeah, again, is that with an EHCP?
Review?
Is that with an EHCP or without one? With one. Yeah, with an EHCP, then obviously at 18, there is supposed to be the involvement, or leading up to the age of 18, involvement from the, depending on the young person's needs, but involvement of the transitions team. But also from post-16 onwards, there is a post-16 team within the SEND team who should be involved. And when they're looking at those social care referrals, it really should take place before their 18th birthday, so that everyone knows and there's time to put things in place, so they don't get to, you know, beyond that 18th birthday and suddenly it's not happened. And the other reassuring thing is that the law does allow, if there's a delay with that transferring for the adult social care assessment and for new needs or whatever to be identified and or provision identified, they must carry on giving them what they're currently giving them and what they need in the meantime. So even though they're over 18, if they are in receipt of, say, short breaks or whatever from the children's through children families, that would have to continue until a new plan was in place.
Okay, would that still apply if as a younger child that they've had no social care involvement, but yeah, you think as an adult?
Right, so if there's been no social care involvement and they're coming up to 18 and you think there may need to be some social care involvement, yeah, the sooner the better to ask for that referral then to adult social care or the transitions team.
Okay.
And I don't know who's taken it over, Kate and Diane. Now Louise has moved on. Do you know who's?
Well, maybe to contact Louisa directly.
Yeah, she would know. But also the post-16 team who sit within the SEND team, they should be able to, that's what their key workers should be focusing on and should know about. So if you ask your key worker, do you know who your key worker is?
Yeah. It's my mind's gone blank on name, but
you know it.
I do know it.
Who's taking over, and I'll share that.
Yeah.
Okay.
Do you have the next question from the chat?
Yeah, I was just going to. Are we on to James?
Yes.
Yeah. I've got it ready there. My daughter is moving to high school in September this year. EHCP is in progress. We are unlikely to get it until July, assuming it's successful. How would this affect our transition if we only have 1 to 2 months before September and schools will be closed because of summer holidays? Bearing in mind she hasn't got high school places yet, and we also had to decline and appeal, and she didn't get her first or second choice, and James Fields and Wimbo. So it's always a tricky time to apply for EHCPs when it's coming up to summer holidays, isn't it? Because, you know, even though they send team work throughout the summer, as do we, the schools are less likely to. However, there has been, you know, consultations made with schools, and some head teachers have responded during that time. But that's dependent, and sometimes there is a bit of a gap in terms of when the EHCPs apply for.
Can I just ask, do you know roughly what date the request for an EHC needs assessment was made? Because obviously you've got the 20-week, unless you've made that application within a couple of weeks of the summer holiday, they've got to stick to that 20 weeks altogether.
Yeah,
and that would mean, so
Yeah,
that
so
would mean your draft plan should be with you, if they agree to issue a draft, should be with you week 16. What date roughly would that be if you work that out?
Ah, right, okay. The July date was based on the 20 weeks, yeah.
Oh, so it'd be
So
before
you-
then, because
Yeah, so you should have more time. Yeah, that's what I was thinking, Dan, because 16 weeks really is well, actually, if they're agreeing to issue a plan, a draft plan, IPSIA and all the legally based advice we see says really ideally you should have that draft plan by week 14 to get everything else done by the 20 weeks. Cheshire East tends to issue them around week 16, which is actually the legal deadline to let parents know if they're not going to issue a draft plan. So that, and that's where there can be a bit of an issue, because you don't know at 14 weeks if they're going to issue one or not. They've not made a decision. But I would go back and ask them, you know, close to that 14 weeks, you know, how likely, you know, how close are you to deciding you're going to issue a draft or not?
Okay.
And work out when your 16 weeks would be, because that hopefully will bring you back into early June, will it?
Yes.
And then if you have a parental choice, and obviously the local authority may have some schools they wish to consult, they can send those consultations out then, and they've got 15 days to respond. So hopefully that could just, I know it's a bit, with a, you know, that should be able to be done before the end of the summer term. I appreciate then we've just talked about ideally transitions, they'd have extra visits, get to know the new setting. That might make that a bit more tricky. But again, I would go back, bear in mind, these legal timescales are the very latest, the very longest they can take.
Okay.
So, you know, I don't think it would be unreasonable to say in the circumstances, you know, round about week 12, they should have got all the advice in. So coming up to week 14, how's it looking? Is it likely that you will be deciding to issue this plan? And heads up, in the meantime, these are the schools we're going to say we'd like to consult as parental preference.
Yeah. Okay.
I've just bobbed something in the chat in terms of what to do when you receive your draft plan.
Yeah, that's helpful.
Okay, that's great.
There's a link there, and it tells you exactly what to do when you receive your draft plan.
Yeah, and on the IPSIA link, which I think is the one Dan sent you, but also on the IPSIA there, they do a, what's it called? It's like a flow chart, timeline for an EHC needs assessment. And if you look on that, that's where it will explain, although it's not set out in law when you must have the draft to fit in with a 20-week timescale, it should be around week 14. But by week 16, they must tell you if they're not going to issue a draft.
Okay.
So if you go onto IPSIA and put in timeline, if you follow Diane's link, you'll find it from there. Actually, just
it's on there from that link that I've just popped up there.
Yeah, and on that timeline, and then I think, you know, when you email your key worker or your plan writer, as they're now liaising with plan writers, aren't we, not key workers, when you can email them and, you know, copy and paste that bit, you know, just say, I was looking at this, you know, can you tell me when I'll find out. And then hopefully also on the IPSIA website, I don't know who's going to get there first between Kate and Dan, they're both quick on the draw, is choosing a school with an EHCP page, which is very useful, I think. I mean, we've got information on our website, but the IPSIA resources are so clear, completely reliable, based entirely on what the law says, that we do tend to say to parents, have a look at that, choosing a school with an EHCP, because it's all summed up there beautifully.
Okay.
I've just popped a really useful link in the chat. Well, I am doing now. It's not gone in. And it's a calculator. It's a calculation bit days between dates.
Oh yeah,
it's just saves you going through your phone on dates, and you can just pop in the dates when you've submitted your EHC needs assessment, and then the date that you can do so many 20 weeks from then. It tells you the date, or 14 weeks. It just saves a little bit of time.
Well, it's a complete change. It's really making things a lot easier for me. Since you sent that, Diane, already. It does save a lot of time.
There's another question in the chat here from a parent that's not able to attend. Does a parent have any more say in what secondary setting their child goes to if they have SEN support but no EHCP? Primary have said they don't need an education, health and care plan, but the new setting named is huge and would be overwhelming. I would say if their child is on SEN support, their needs should be documented in their SEN support plan, which would be communicated to the high school of the choice.
I mean, I would suggest, and I know we've got it in some of our guides about, trying to get, even if it's just a Teams meeting, trying to get a bit of a meeting with the SENCO at the school where your child potentially will be joining, to go through that SEN support plan and ask them what they think, because they're working in that environment, and really try and be quite, if you have to be a bit persistent even to get half an hour on Teams, I think it's well worth it. And obviously you can share by email the SEN support plan ahead of that little meeting and just go through it. Usually the links between high schools and primaries are very good, and they will during year 6 be meetings between the two SENCOs where they discuss, a whole peer group, anyone with SEN support plans or EHCPs. And so they will be aware, but I still think it's important, if you as a parent can get to have that time with the new SENCO, let them see the SEN support plan, because sometimes they will say, actually, we agree with you. We think your son, daughter might struggle, and, perhaps we can do this about it. And it opens up a discussion then, doesn't it? And if you really feel, it depends if it's the size of the mainstream setting or the type, or it's just that particular school. But if the parent feels that their child's going to struggle in it, because most mainstream high schools in Cheshire East are quite large, some are huge. If it is about that, any mainstream high school is going to be a struggle, then maybe that parent should be looking back at the SEN support plan, speak to the SENCO at the receiving school, and maybe consider looking at making about an EHC needs assessment request themselves as a parent. I mean, we always say in an ideal world, schools will trigger that request working with the parents, but obviously parents can.
We do find over the years that there's a high number of EHC needs assessment requests put in year 7, because it's a very different environment to that nurturing primary setting that children have been in. So looking at the statistics, there are a high amount of EHC needs of assessments put in year 7, year 8 for children. So it's a different setting, so it's there's a lot more movement, rather at primary school they used to probably 3 teachers at the most, whereas they may have, when they get to secondary school, 12 subject teachers, a lot of movement around the school, a lot more children in the school, so probably find that needs are greater. So that's when a lot of needs assessments are submitted in those early years of secondary school.
And I did see in the discussion around this question there were a few people saying, no, it was awful, had to get there and then apply. But there were people who, as you said, Penny, went and spoke to the Senko at the new school they were going to, and having been, this is never going to work, and really upset and very, very anxious about it, came away really reassured about the support that was going to be in place, and it was realistic, and we're going to give this a go. And if it doesn't work, absolutely, we'll try something else. But so it is worth saying, come on, convince me, reassure me, and getting that.
Yeah, and sometimes the other way, Kate, you know, sometimes the Senko at the school they're due to move up to will say, actually, no, I've spoken to you and you've explained this in the SEN support plan, give me a bit more background. I'm inclined to agree with you that, you know, maybe this child does meet the criteria for an EHC needs assessment, in which case it would make sense to get on with it.
And a lot of secondary schools have a lot higher amount of children with additional needs. You know, you've got to think of all the feeder schools that are coming into a secondary school, and there's a lot of rural schools where there's not as many, maybe not as many children with additional needs. So the school don't have as much experience in different areas of SEN. But, you know, when they go to high school, it's you know, as a parent said to me not long ago, moving from a very small rural school on the outskirts of Macclesfield, when they went to a high school, they said, it's no big deal. The school have said, you know, we see this all the time, whereas it was made to be much bigger at primary. So at secondary, they had a lot more resources and a lot more experience to deal with, you know, more complex, you know, a child's more complex needs. And it wasn't seen to be so different. You know, the child felt like it fitted in more at secondary school. So it can work both ways, really.
Yeah, it can.
I can see somebody's got a hand up. Is that Kayla?
Hi, it is. I was just popping it in the chat. It's from a parent that can't make it today, but they're in the process of moving from Scotland into the area. They've got a 6-year-old son with diagnosis of autism, and they would like to know how they can make the process easier for him. They also have said he's one of a set of triplets and has never been separated from them. But when they're starting school, he's going to be put in one class and the other two in a second class. And they're not sure whether he should be on his own or not. He does struggle to make friends. So they're curious of whether to put him on his own so that he can build his own relationships, but don't know if it'd be a bit too much for him.
Have the school given a reason why they're separating them?
Not that I know of. That's
okay. Again, I would
that's
say,
all the info I have.
As a mother of multiples, I would say the pros and cons of doing that. Twins of Multiple Birth Association, TAMBA, have got quite a lot of resources, also a helpline, although I think the helpline's not as open as often as it used to be due to funding and everything capacity. But they certainly do have resources on there about, do you split them, don't you split them? But I think my first question as a parent would be, you know, why are you thinking you'd like to separate them? What is it about? You know, it could be that the class they're thinking of putting the one on their own with the additional needs into has got another TA in there already. So it could be something to do with staffing. So I think just ask and find out why they're thinking of doing it. And it could also be that the school maybe haven't had a lot of multiple births there and they don't understand the dynamic between twins, triplets and more.
And I would say as well, Kayla, if you want to direct the parent to our service to get in contact with us to have a more in-depth conversation, if that would help.
Because again, with the Scottish system, they have independent learning plans or whatever they're called up there, which is similar but not exactly the same as an EHCP. So we could kind of do with knowing where that one with the additional needs sits on the graduated response, graduated approach, because then we could, you know, if they're thinking of putting an EHC needs assessment request in as soon as they move, again, that might be into, I think we might need to speak to them to give more.
I have given them your information, directed them to your website.
Ask questions, that's the thing, you know. That's it, Twins Trust, you found it. If they ask the questions really and ask why they're doing it, because I could well be because there's an additional TA in that other class. But then I would be thinking, can't they put all three in? But then it could be to do with the numbers going over. Yeah. So they just unpick it a little bit and ask.
Thank you.
Okay, that next question, Kayla, a parent has just asked if they have chosen an out-of-area high school which has a good SEN reputation. Could transport rules for non-EHCP children be clarified, as they're assuming they will get no help with transport? I would be inclined.
Again, it's whether they would meet the criteria of an eligible child, and
no EHCP.
And without an EHCP, to meet the, you can look at what the criteria are to be an eligible child, but it would be quite unusual, but not impossible, that someone could be an eligible child for the transport in law without having an EHCP, but I've not come across one in many years.
It's not
And
my
it would have to,
understanding.
yeah, it would need to be, and again, that is because you do have some children who you don't need an EHCP, but might struggle with getting somewhere, you know, using the bus or whatever. So you'd have to look through what makes a child eligible for that free home to school transport. And again, the government have got a guidance on that, which is also on the local authorities website, home to school transport guidance, and that will give you the definition of an eligible child. So you could have a look and see if you thought your child met those criteria.
The local authority would normally look for the nearest school to meet need.
Yeah.
In terms of,
you see that, well, that's the other thing. I'm assuming just because it's across the border, it's the nearest. If it's not the nearest, then even if they were eligible for the transport, it would be for nearest for
parents
need.
live on the border, you know, on the border.
Sometimes it's nearer. Yeah. I'm sorry, I was making the assumption it was near, even though it was over the border. Yeah. If there's a nearer school within Cheshire East, then even if they were an eligible child for the transport, even if you could prove that, then they would be saying it's to your nearest for need, which could be this side of the border. So it's a bit complicated, but look at the definition. It is in theory possible that your child's an eligible child for transport without an EHCP, but if it's not nearest for need, you won't get it.
Yeah.
They won't have to give it to you.
No. Have we got any further ones there? Kate? Oh, sorry, I missed one. I don't know if this is a silly question. We don't have any silly questions.
No, it's not a silly question.
What sort of benefits would a specialist school offer? Would there be less classroom transitions in the day? Is specialist school mainly appropriate if our child couldn't cope in a secondary setting? I think there's lots.
A huge range, aren't there, Diane?
There's lots. No specialist school is the same, so it's really looking at what your child's needs are and what the reasons they're not, you know, able to access mainstream school, because it's every parent's right to a mainstream setting. They would have to have an education, health and care plan in place for mainstream. I don't know if that's the case with this particular query. Specialist schools are all different. They are all different. Some specialist settings have smaller classrooms. They have different criteria. They have different access to qualifications, the curriculum. If a child's very able, you need to be very clear that they may not be able to offer as many GCSEs qualifications and A levels as they go up through the school. So it's really looking at what your child's needs are and you know why they would maybe need a specialist setting and what couldn't be provided in a mainstream setting.
And I think the overarching thing we could say applies to just about all specialist settings I'm aware of, at least within a 30-mile radius, is they do tend to be smaller overall and fewer in each year group generally. Some of the schools do still move around between classes for different subjects. Some of them don't. They stay, except for science or, you know, D&T or PE or whatever, they do stay in the same classroom and the teacher comes to theirs. So there is to them. So there is quite a variety, but it is sometimes just that it's a smaller environment. And within those schools, yeah, like Dan said, usually the class size is a bit smaller than a mainstream as well. And in fact, in some specialist settings, it's tiny, you know, very small class sizes, 6, 7. Others, it's, you know, 11 to 13, something like that. And they all are very different. So do your research, get on the websites, have a look. And as Dan said, think about your child's particular special educational needs and or disability, and find a setting that's set up to meet those needs. And then obviously double check what curriculum offer is. And higher staffing ratio, sorry, that's what I should have said.
Staffing ratio and distance from your home, because, you know, we've also got to take that into account where, you know, we've got very few specialist provision settings in Cheshire East, and we do find a lot of Cheshire East children, due to capacity in specialist settings at the moment, are having to travel
huge distance, some of them
out of the local area to be educated. So that's just a consideration as well.
And also,
you know, you don't want your little one travelling an hour and 20 minutes somewhere in Staffordshire.
So there's a higher
that can be avoided.
Yeah, so you've got a higher staff to pupil ratio, but also you know, it's often the experience, training, qualifications of those staff, you know, maybe specialised in, for instance, if it's an autism specific school or social communication specific school, you might find there's a higher level of awareness and training and meeting those needs, and it's embedded throughout the whole school day. Or you might also find some specialist schools, they've got much readier access. They've got occupational therapists, speech and language therapists, even EPs actually on site or coming in regularly. So if your child needs those kind of services, then again, that's a consideration to bear in mind, you know, what do they need? But yeah,
but a child, just to be clarify, your child does need to have a education, health and care plan in place to access specialist setting. Greta, do you know the definitive list of all available schools in Cheshire East? The one on the LA website has lots missing and includes privates, and doesn't include, it includes some independent settings,
does, yeah,
which is section 41 settings. There is, I am aware, and I've not got any updates, but they are revising that list and making it more comprehensive. I don't know if Kate has any further updates. Kate and I are due to attend the work stream next Tuesday or Wednesday, and that's a question that I'd like to ask, because we have raised it before and we've been told that it was in the process of being updated, but we've not got any further updates from the head of service.
But Kate and I raised it again on Monday, didn't we, in that work stream, communication one, and the person who's now responsible for making sure the local offer is up to date within that team, she in fact, she's waiting for us to send us. I'm going to send her an email today or tomorrow, just going through what we've already asked them, that there are some schools missing. But it's not just that, it's a statutory requirement for the local offer to give all the information parents need. So what type of school are they? So although they've broken them down by need, as in, are they SEMH? Is it to do with hearing impairment? Is it to do with, you know, visual impairment or whatever? They've got the different type, but they've not got the category which should be on there. So is it independent? Is it an independent but section 41? Is it a non-maintained special school? Is it a special academy? It's a statutory requirement for the local authority to have that in the local offer, and at the moment it's not consistent. You're right, Greta, it is missing. So I'm not aware of a list other than in my head and Diane's and Kate's. And
there isn't one at the moment. We have raised it, and the last update that we had was that it was being revised and a more comprehensive booklet was being put together. We've not got an update on that, but we will try and get one next week.
Or you could ask her, and we might be able to say if there's some of the ones we know are missing.
Yeah.
There's just one last one, and I'm very aware of time. If REHCP discusses one-to-one support, does this tend to translate to multiple people supporting my child at secondary school, differing between classes and subjects, or would one person follow my child around at school?
Again, that varies.
Yeah, or again, does this
general
vary
model
between?
is it's more than one, and actually you might say that's good practice in a way, because those particular one-to-ones, if they're subject specific, will be able to give the best possible support around that subject in there. And also, if you've only got one TA and they're off sick, then you know you're a bit stuck with your child.
And you don't want too much reliance on one particular TA, and especially at secondary school, you know, the specialist subject TA teachers. So
yeah,
it's really good to have different TAs, really.
And that can be of benefit. Very, I will say though, very occasionally, very rarely, dependent on need. It, you know, sometimes a high school will allocate, say, just 2 TAs, but it's quite rare, and it would be completely dependent on that young person's needs, and there'd have to be a reason why, and that would have to be clear in the EHCP why they needed to stick to a couple of people.
Another anecdotal example of that was a child who I know was really, really anxious, and they were built up to having more. So they started off with one person who'd come into primary school, met them in primary school, and then they almost introduced them to
the others,
two at a time, to then meet the rest. And it worked. It was like, I think it was something, again, the parent was very scared, but it worked. So,
and the last thing you want is, you know, a child to be dependent on one person, then them for whatever reason be unable to support due to sickness or whatever, and then you
do need to,
not anybody. So it's good to, you know, 2 or 3 people, or, you know, just really looking at how that works, especially with subject TA, specialist TA, subject teachers.
Yeah,
and I suppose that one of the few times where they might stick to maybe just the 2 one-to-ones or something like that is if there's specific medical needs, health needs, and they've not trained all the bank of all the TAs aren't trained to manage that condition, then that might be an exception as well.
If there's any specific questions that you need to, for anyone that needs to speak to us more in depth, please just give us a call. Penny and I and Helen are all working remotely, but if you just leave a quick message on our answering machine or email us, we'll get back to you. We do say within 5 working days, but we do tend to get back within 2 or 3, so we're very efficient. But if there's any specific questions, please just get back to us.
Brilliant. Can I just say a massive thank you to you both for giving us your time, and sorry for putting you on the spot by, you know, give us a presentation that no one had said about. It's really,
thanks,
Kate. We will put together all the notes and the links and everything that you've shared into the notes with the YouTube, and we will share it widely. We'll share it with yourselves as well. So yes,
that's lovely. Thank you.
Thank you very much, everybody.
That's
lovely.